Hello everyone, Bendy Bono here. I am on another tight schedule today. I have, 15 minutes at the most. So let's get cracking. We got 4 articles to get to in the life of God, and this rounds out the section in the treatise on the one God on the divine, or on God's knowledge. So we enter into kind of the home stretch of this first treatise after this question. But for now, we're still on question 18, the life of God, and we are going to look at whether to live belongs to all natural things, whether life is an operation, whether life is properly attributed to God, whether all things are life in God. Let's dive right in. Whether to live belongs to all natural things. So Aristotle says these are our objections, that movement is a kind of life. All natural things participate in movement. Therefore, all natural things partake of life. All natural bodies have local movement. This is natural. Thus, all natural bodies live. That wasn't a typo. It was just a misread on my part. That's nice for a little change of pace. Life is attributed to elements like water. Yet natural bodies are more perfect than these. Therefore, they too must have life. And he's talking about how, if you refer to, or even scriptures refer to, living waters, stuff like that. But Dionysius says that plants have the lowest level of life. Inanimate objects are lower than plants and therefore do not have life. So take that, inanimate objects. All right, life belongs to animals. Therefore, we can distinguish living and non-living things that are not animals by comparing them to animals. When animals cease to have any movement in themselves, they lose the capacity for self-movement, they are said to be dead. They can still be moved, but they cannot move themselves. Therefore, things that move themselves are called living, that have some kind of independent internal movement, such as plants and everything else does, that are higher life than plants. And then things that cannot move themselves are not living, like rocks. Rocks can be moved, they do not move themselves. Aristotle is speaking of life in similitude and is not intending to attribute it to all natural bodies. Fair enough. Unless these bodies move themselves, they cannot be said to be alive. Then referring to waters as living waters is, and this one was probably pretty obvious, to use similitude. It's just a metaphor. But is life an operation? Well, let's find out. Aristotle says, that little pesky guy causing us more problems, that life is divided by operations. Therefore, life is an operation. The active and contemplative life are different, but are only distinguished by operations. And to know God is an operation. And John 18:3 speaks of knowing God as life. So what do we do with that? Well, Aristotle says that to live is to be. The name life is used in response to self-movement, but does not signify self-movement. That's an important distinction. I can't talk today, everyone. A distinction. No, it's a distinction and an important one. Let's flesh that out a little bit more. Rather, it signifies the substance from which the operation of self-movement flows. So, the fact that self-movement exists tells us that something is alive. But self-movement is not life. Rather, self-movement is simply an operation that living things have. Okay? So, a small but important distinction. Nevertheless, the term is sometimes used to mean operations, but this is a less proper usage. Not quite a metaphorical usage, but still less proper. So Aristotle is using life in the less proper sense to mean operations. Then reply to 2 and 3, the term life is used in similitude to refer to the type of life lived. So some metaphorically referring to like active, self-indulgent, or contemplative, eternal life. And that would be answers to questions, or to objections 2 and 3. Just going back to the argument for 1 second. I think the way you could you could kind of get an idea of what that distinction is, and it's not quite perfect. But if you think of somebody who is completely paralyzed, completely incapable of movement, but yet is still alive, uh, that kind of gets that distinction. Uh, it's not perfect because I think that even in somebody who's completely paralyzed, obviously there's some level of self-movement, whether it be, brain waves or heart beating or pulse or something like that would still kind of count as self movement, um, and would certainly distinguish whether somebody who was 100% paralyzed was alive or dead. Uh, but it kind of sort of gives you an idea of how that distinction might occur. All right, let's keep going. Article 3, whether life is properly attributed to God. Is God alive? Well, probably, but let's find out. Things are said to live insofar as they move themselves. Movement does not belong to God, therefore neither does life. It's one of those objections where the answer to this article is so blindingly obvious, but you're like, that's a good point. So we'll see what we say to that in just a little bit. Aristotle says that the soul is the cause and principle of life. God has no cause or principle. Therefore, he does not have life, and the principle of life is found in corporeal things only. Since God is incorporeal, he cannot have life. Well, but Captain Obvious, Psalm 83:3 says that it refers to God as the living God. God is alive, right? Life is found in God in its most perfect and highest form. There is a hierarchy of life. The lowest level is the movement and life of plants, and there's the self-movement of animals, but the highest form of life is the movement of intelligible beings. God is of the highest form and thus is most perfectly alive, since he is a fully intelligible being. Yes. Objections answered. That which understands itself is said to move itself. God understands himself perfectly. Again, kind of going back to the example I was using before, in that this is where that example of a completely paralyzed person would fall apart. That movement goes beyond mere physical movement. You think of if we discovered telepathy and you had somebody who was 100% paralyzed, um, but you could still communicate with that person telepathically. Well, there would still be movement taking place there. There was a news story a month or so ago about somebody who had been in a vegetative state for 12 years, and he emerged and said, "Oh yeah, I remembered everything. I was fully aware the whole time. I just couldn't move myself." That's kind of what we're talking about here. That God doesn't have this kind of movement, but he has this kind of movement. Movement of intelligence is still movement. So God is his own life, thus he needs no principle or cause of life, and then corporeal life requires generative quality since it is corruptible, and that's not true of the incorruptible, incorporeal life of God. And then finally, are all things life in God? Well, not all things in God are movement, therefore not all things are life in him. Since not everything has life in itself, it seems not all things are life in God. Augustine says things that have life are better than things that don't. If something doesn't actually live but has life in God, it would exist most truly in God. And that is impossible, since its life in God is merely potential, whereas the thing itself is actual. A complex objection, but you break it down a little bit, that's a pretty interesting one, and he has an interesting answer to it. If all things are life in God, then even bad things are life in God, which seems impossible. And if you've been paying attention to Aquinas' discussion of evil, that the answer to that one will be pretty obvious when we get there. All right, John 1:3-4 says that whatever was made in him was life. I think that was probably a comma there, that whatever was made in him was, or no, whatever was made, comma, pause, in him was life. It's kind of the way he's intending that to be read. In God, to live is to understand. God understands all things. All things are life in him. Very brief argument, pretty straightforward, just kind of building upon conclusions we've already reached. Objections. Well, things are in God to the extent that he is their preserver, insofar as he knows them. In the latter sense, they are not distinct from the divine essence, and in this way all have life in him. So as long as we're talking about things as having life in God in the sense that he knows them, that's what we mean. And from there kind of flows the answer to objection 2, that the ideas of things, not the things themselves, have life in God. Thus, even an inanimate object, like a rock that doesn't have life in itself, has life in God so far as God knows that rock. The idea of things in God's mind is nobler than the things themselves, but their existence is truer in themselves than in the divine mind. So making a distinction between what Augustine is referring to as a better or nobler existence and a truer existence. And objection 3 is conflating those two qualities, and Augustine is dividing them, or Aquinas is dividing them and saying they're two different things. And then the bad things in God's mind are known through the good things, thus they are not truly in God's mind, as they have no independent existence there. Pretty much what we've seen regarding evil non-existence up until this point. Nothing too radical or shocking there. All right, we did it. Nice quick video. Move on next time. It's another long article or question for question 19. I think that's 12 articles, so that'll take us 2 to 3 videos to get through. But we'll keep rolling right along with question 19 next time. Until then, I will talk to you later. I'm Bendy Bono. Goodbye.